share my presentations. Hopefully y'all can see my screen. Thanks for coming. If you are looking for funding to study critical need languages abroad, you are in the right place. We're here to talk about the Boren Awards, and we are lucky enough to have two representatives from Boren here today to help answer your questions, give you the insider scoop on this amazing opportunity. So I'll go ahead and just do a few kind of housekeeping things, and then I will have Sarah Chow and Michael Saffel introduce themselves alongside a couple of national fellowships and scholar programs team members that are also here joining us today. So first off, if you have your phone available, use this QR code to sign in. I'll also send the link out in our follow-up email, but we just want to make sure to record that you are here today. All right, and so just a brief agenda, what we're going to cover in the next hour or so. We are going to have a quick icebreaker introduction with Michael Saff. And I didn't know Sarah Chow was joining us. Sorry about that, Sarah. So we'll have you introduce yourself as well. And then they will provide an overview of the Boren Awards, answer some of your questions. We'll come back to the National Fellowships team for tips for crafting a strong application and next steps for getting involved with the process here at USC. So I'm just going to put a couple of questions up here. Y'all can take a second, think about them. Throw your answers in the chat. The questions are, what made you interested in your target language if you already picked one out? What are you hoping to learn in this workshop? And is there anything you're nervous about or have questions about? So what made you pick your target language? What are you nervous about? And what are you hoping to learn? And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and turn it over to the real experts in the room, Michael and Susan, or Sarah, sorry. Can't even read today. Sarah, thank you so much.
I'm going to let Michael speak first because he is having computer issues and we'll have to dip out. So
exactly. Right. So my name is Michael Saffel. I've worked with Boren for many moons. Sarah and I have both been at Boren forever, so we are the best people you can talk to, and I'm not bragging. It is a fact. Sarah's going to give you all the information she has. I'm going to give you right now before I dip out because I am having issues and I have a live webinar in an hour. I need to make sure people can see me. That's our email address. Feel free to ask questions to Sarah in the comments or in the chat box. But if you think of something later, now you have our email address and you'll see it at the end of this presentation anyway. Good luck, everybody. Apologies for having the technical difficulties that I am.
Thanks, Michael. Hello, everyone. I just want to echo Michael's thanks. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to speak to you about Boren today. And as Michael said, both him and I have been with the Boren Awards for quite a few years. I do a lot of outreach for Boren, but my main job is actually I oversee the application selection process. So this award or this presentation is right up my alley. So I can't wait to answer your questions and to hear your questions. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right, so you should see my screen right now. If you don't, please chime in and let me know. But saying that you can. My presentation, I'm going to kind of go through it relatively quickly, simply so we have plenty of time to answer your questions about how to craft a stronger application and what have you. If you do have questions, definitely either raise your hand or actually, since we're on a webinar, just feel free to unmute yourself and like chime in with a question, and I can either answer it right then, or I can say it'll help me direct, like know what to focus on as we get further along in the presentation, and also we can like know exactly what your areas of interest and curiosities are. So
yeah, all right, and Sarah, sorry, before you launch into everything, I was going to say I forgot to introduce myself and who we are. So for those of you who aren't familiar with our team, I'm Heidi Brett, I use she, her pronouns, and I'm part of the National Fellowships team at USC. So we're an office comprised of national fellowships and also scholar programs, and we help support USC students and alumni in applying for these types of awesome awards. And I'm joined by Matthew Kloppenstein, who is one of our, if you want to wave, one of our other advisors who focuses on grad awards. So if you're a grad student, he is your person. And then Brett Williams is here, who helps out with our scholar program. So I just wanted to flag that before we got too deep into the Boren needs. So we're here to answer questions as well. So thanks. All right, take it away, Sarah.
Thanks, Heidi. And just to echo what Heidi was saying, as someone who doesn't work at USC and works specifically with Boren, USC has been successful with their Boren applications, and they provide a lot of support, and they're really good resources. So I cannot stress enough how lucky you guys are to have them. So definitely use everyone who's here. All right, so the Boren Awards. So what is the Boren Awards? I always kind of start my presentation with basically my elevator pitch for the Boren Awards because I refer back to it throughout the entire presentation. But what is it? It is a nationally competitive scholarship that is sponsored by the government. It is meant to give both undergraduate and graduate students the opportunity to study less commonly studied languages in countries that are deemed critical to U.S. national security. We have 3 cornerstones to the Boren Awards, language, culture, and service. And throughout this presentation, I'll refer both back to, I'll always reference those 3 cornerstones, and I'll always bring it back to that first sentence. As I mentioned, this is a nationally competitive government-sponsored scholarship. It is a DoD award. Specifically, it's housed within the Defense Language and National Security Education Office initiative. I'm going to call it DELINCEO moving forward, and it's an NCEP National Security Education Program Initiative. So you'll hear me say NCEP a lot. You will not hear me say Defense Language and National Security Education Office Initiative. Again, that's a mouthful. It is administered by IIE, the Institute of International Education, and that's who I work for, is through IIE. And as I said earlier, my main position within the Boren Awards team is I oversee the application selection process. All right. I can get this moving. All right. So as you can see, this is a pretty generous award. So you can receive, you can receive up to $25,000 for a 25 to 52 week program. Again, this is a program that's focused on you really immersing yourself in language. And the best way to learn language is to spend as much time there. So that's why our preferred quote unquote length of time is a year-long program. That's why you receive the max amount of money for going abroad for a year. If you do the math, however, 25 weeks actually ends up being 6 months. But for Boren, it's considered a year. So if you get to that 25-week threshold, you definitely want to, because you get twice as much money as if you only go for a semester. That said, if you do go for a semester, you can receive up to $12,500 for a 12 to 24-week program. And then for scholars, undergraduate students only, if you are a STEM major, we have special eligibility for you to be able to go abroad in the summer. And you can receive $8,000 for an 8 to 11 week program. Keep in mind, again, though, this you do have to be a STEM major. And even though you're a STEM major, you have to be, the purpose of going abroad is still to learn language. So this is not a program where you are a biology major and you can take biology while you're abroad. You can, but the Boren Award is to focus on a language. And the reason we have that is because we understand it can be really difficult to take time off from your course schedule to go abroad. So we want to give everyone the opportunity to study language. If you're a graduate student, you would apply for the Boren Fellowships. The Boren Fellowships, we do not have that special summer STEM eligibility. But you do have the opportunity to receive up to $12,000 for a domestic program that you can go on to like brush up on your language before you go abroad. So you do have that opportunity that you don't have a scholarship. So those are the amounts that you can receive from the award. The basic eligibility for Boren is that you need to be a U.S. citizen. You need to be planning to study a foreign language intensively. Again, foreign language is the key component of Boren. What we mean by an eligible world region is basically everywhere is eligible except for Western Europe, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Canada, Australia, New Zealand because they speak English, and Western Europe because those are where the commonly taught languages are spoken. You need to be matriculated at an accredited school, which all of you guys who are USC students check. You do meet that eligibility requirement. If you're a fellow, you need to be matriculated by the time you go abroad. So if you are an alumni right now, but you are thinking about going to grad school, then you'll just want to work and make sure you can get that paperwork, matriculation paperwork figured out and signed out before you go abroad. And lastly, you can't be a citizen of the destination country that you're going to. So if you are going, you can be a dual citizen, that's fantastic. But you just can't be. So for instance, if you were a US and Colombian dual citizen, you couldn't use the board to study in Colombia, but you could use it to study in Peru, Argentina, etc. All right. So as I mentioned, you can receive up to $25,000, and these are the different like categories of the award amounts. The reason we bring that up is because it is a generous award, but the caveat is that your Boren funding has to be used towards Boren eligible costs. It used to be in the previous years, you had to put a proposed budget down in your application, and you no longer have to do that. That's no longer part of the application process. If you're going abroad for a year, you'll receive $25,000. That said, you have to make sure and that all of everything that you spend your Boren funding on is on Boren related costs. So Boren related costs are listed here. Things that are not covered are things like passports, vaccinations, dependents, US rent. Your housing while you're abroad is covered, but your housing back home is not. Just to kind of clarify that. Credit card payments, things like that. You can use multiple awards to cover to help pay for your overseas program. It's just with Boren, we have our policy is that you can't double dip, quote unquote, meaning that say you receive a Gilman and the Boren to study abroad, and your housing costs are $5,000. If you use Gilman to pay for that $5,000 for housing, then at that point we would either reduce your Boren award by $5,000 because you cannot use Boren for housing, or you would work with your Boren advisor to figure out how that $5,000 should be allocated elsewhere, still on a Boren eligible cost. So a lot of details. I just want in your heads, so if you do receive the award and you're talking about it, it's familiar to you. But right now in the application process, the good news is you don't have to worry about figuring out your budget and the application. And then if you receive the award, then you'll have a lot of conversations and what have you to figure out the details with your Boren advisor. All right. So as I mentioned in that first sentence, Boren wants people to study language in countries that are deemed critical to U.S. national security. Similar to how our preferred length of time is that year-long time frame, we have preferred countries as well. If you go to our website, we actually list out all the preferred countries. This is a great map because it's very visual, but it doesn't tell you what they all are. On our website, it'll have a list of our preferred countries. And our preferred countries are those countries that are colored in blue and green. The countries that are colored in green, those are preferred, and we fully intend to send students there, no problems. The countries that are colored in blue, those are also preferred, but on that list on the website, they have an asterisk next to them, which means we call them our asterisk countries, and it means that we haven't sent students to we have not sent students to those countries to study in the last few years, and we don't anticipate funding study to those countries in this upcoming cycle. You can still apply to one of those countries, but you have to put an alternate country down with a viable alternate plan to study that language in a different country. Similarly, we have asterisk languages, quote unquote. That's Arabic, Mandarin, and Russian. If you're applying to study one of those three languages, you also have to put an alternate plan down where you can study that language. The difference between an asterisk country and an asterisk language is, for instance, my example that I always use is Russia is Russia. So if you're applying to study Russian in Russia, you'd have to put an asterisk down or an alternate country down because Russia and Russian have an asterisk next to it. We're not going to send people to Russia in this upcoming cycle. Unless something radical changes in the relationship between the U.S. and Russia, but I don't see that happening. So if you receive the award, you would go to your backup, say Latvia, to study in Russian. However, if on your application you applied to study Russian in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan does not have an asterisk next to it, but Russia does. You'd still have to put in a backup plan in your application, but we're sending people to Kazakhstan. So we would send you to your first choice country in that scenario. The reason we have the asterisk languages is because we started this during COVID when everyone was changing all the time. And because those three languages are very popular and they're spoken in more than one country, we just want people thinking ahead of time, thinking of an alternate plans just in case. Hopefully everything is moving smooth as far as COVID is concerned, but we just want you in the practice of thinking of backups, part of flexibility. So those are the blue and green countries. The yellow countries are those are eligible countries for Boren, but they're not preferred. You can still apply to study in a yellow country, but you just have to be cognizant about making an argument about why you want to study in a country that is not preferred by Boren. Can be done. For example, Mongolia is a yellow country. It is not preferred but eligible, but it's also smack dab in the middle of two pretty hostile geopolitical powers that are hostile to the US. So I'm sure you could think of a strong national security argument for why you should study in Mongolia. And then, of course, the gray countries are the ones that aren't eligible. The other preferences we have are for language. These are all our language preferences. If you guys are interested or have done the critical language scholarship in the past, all of those languages are preferred, plus a bunch, because again, these are Boren wants students to be able to study less commonly taught languages. One of the neat things about Boren is that with the exception of French and Spanish, none of these languages have a prerequisite for language level. So if you are a true beginner and you've never studied, you want to study Moldovan and you've never done that before, that is fine. You are eligible to study Moldovan through the Boren Awards. True beginners can and do receive the Boren, so do not let any kind of self-perceived language level prevent you from applying or going for that language. Spanish is yes.
Never mind. You're going to talk about what I was just going to ask you about. Let's talk a little bit more about Spanish.
Yeah. So Spanish is not preferred. It is one of the countries that has a language requisite. You have to be at an advanced level. And the reason Spanish isn't preferred is because, again, it's less commonly taught languages, and Spanish is quite commonly taught. One thing that's interesting about Spanish, however, is that you'll notice a lot of countries where they speak Spanish are preferred, but Spanish itself is not a preferred language. By far, the most popular and the easiest way to study in Latin America through the Boren is to study Portuguese in Brazil. That is not to say you cannot propose to study Spanish in Latin America. You just need to make an extremely strong argument about why Boren should fund you to study a language that's already so widely spoken and that you're already at an advanced level. So if you are interested in studying Spanish in one of these in Latin America, your angle should be that you want to study a particular type of Spanish. Like, say you want to study medical Spanish because you're going to do that. You can only do that in Costa Rica or what have you. Or, for instance, there's Argentine Spanish can be quite difficult, and like business in Argentina or something like that. You'd have to find a very, very specific reason to study where you have to go to Latin America to study that you couldn't get here in the US. Another thing that you could do that's a little bit more unusual when it comes to Latin America, you see here that all African indigenous languages are preferred. We do list several, but if it's an indigenous language anywhere in the continent of Africa, it's preferred. Latin American indigenous languages are not technically preferred, but they are very interesting and they tend to stick out in the application process. And the application is usually very thoughtful. For instance, last year we had a couple of people who applied to study Mayan in Mexico, actually, and one of them actually received the award. So again, it's not technically preferred, but if you were interested in studying a Latin American indigenous language and you had you wanted to also practice and intensify, I guess, your Spanish, a Latin American, like an indigenous language, may be a good angle for you to, maybe something you want to consider. I will also mention that French is one of the languages that does have a prerequisite. You need to be at advanced high. And French is only preferred if you study it through our African Language Flagship Initiative, or our AFLI program, which I'll get into that in more detail a little bit later. You can propose to study French in Martinique, but French wouldn't be considered preferred in that scenario, although it would probably be a great experience. And lastly, our other preference is for field of study, or for major. The majors listed in red are what we consider STEM. So if you're interested in that summer STEM eligibility, that's the majors that you have to be at one of these majors. The languages listed, or the subjects listed in white, are also considered preferred, but not in STEM. We have a finite list on our application. It does not, by any stretch of the imagination, cover all the majors that are out there. If your major doesn't fall neatly or exactly into one of these that's listed, that's fine. Just pick the one that matches most closely. You can ask your campus reps, you can ask us, you can call us, but don't stress and spend a lot of time debating it. If you're a biochemistry major and you're not sure if you should choose biology or chemistry, just pick one, whatever. And you also have to upload your transcript. So the reviewers, and we will see what your actual major is. So like, if you're a fine arts major and you pick biology, that would look weird. But again, we understand, like, there's a lot of majors out there. We can only list so many. So, all right. So these are our study preferences. Next, let's talk about the way that you can utilize the Boren. And there's two ways to do that. There are self-identified programs and our regional flagship language initiatives, or what I'll call the FLEs moving forward. For the FLEs, we have AFLI, SAFLI, TERFLI, and new this year we have CFLI, which includes Indonesian, which we had in the past, but also Thai and Vietnamese. But before we go into details about the FLE programs, let's talk about these self-identified programs. A self-identified program structure is just a fancy pants way that Boren calls for studying abroad. This is what the majority of our students use Boren for. And in this scenario, you want to think of Boren as a scholarship or a fellowship. It helps pay for your study abroad program. One thing that we've done that's new this year is on our website, we've listed out all the programs that Borens have gone on in the last 3 years per country. That list it's just information for you guys for you to use. It is not affiliated with Boren. It's not approved by Boren. It's not preferred. You don't have a stronger application if you choose one program or a program that's on the list versus not on the list. It is just simply because, it's a place to start if you're curious about where you would like to study. But one of the neat things that I think that's really interesting about Boren is because that Boren is so focused on getting students to study language, we don't require that you receive credit or go on a credit-bearing program while you're abroad. That said, USC requires that you are in a credit-bearing program to maintain your matriculation, and we absolutely will fund traditional study abroad programs. But what this means is, in addition to the traditional study abroad program, Boren will also fund things like private tutoring or a language school or a volunteer program or internship or what have you. And that really comes into play during the fellowships, because while there are a lot of traditional programs that you can go on the undergraduate level, there's a lot less for the fellowship and a lot less that meet your specific studies. So for the fellows, for the graduate students who apply for the fellows, they're often just piecemealing their program together, and they can do some really interesting things that really utilize play to their strengths and what their needs are. This is also a way that you can get to that 25-week threshold. One thing that we hate to see is someone who goes abroad for 23 weeks. And we're like, if you go abroad for 23 weeks, you only get $12,500. But if you go abroad for an extra week, 2 weeks, you can get twice as much funding. So if you go abroad for that traditional study abroad program and it's, you go for the spring, you can stay an extra 2 weeks at a language school or hire private tutoring or something. And then you get that full 2,500. You still get your credit, but you also increase your, language acquisition while you're there.
And Sarah, I will pop in with just a USC specific thing. So I know the word matriculation was mentioned earlier in the presentation, And basically that means that you are still attached to USC as a student. So if you are a junior or like planning to go abroad your junior year, or you're a graduate student, you're perfectly fine. You don't need to listen to the rest of this comment. But if you are planning to do like a year after you would finish up your studies here at USC, so say you were doing like kind of a fifth year senior experience, you will have to delay your graduation slightly, but you'll still be able to graduate, and that will retain you as a matriculated student. And we're in the process of kind of finalizing all of those details, and we will share the exact process with you, hopefully in the next little while, probably a couple weeks to a month, to have that solidify as to how you maintain matriculation. But just know that that's something that comes up pretty frequently, and we've got a solution for it. So very excited about that.
Yeah, no, that is really exciting. Because the one thing Boren doesn't do is do like your traditional gap year program, because you can't graduate and then study and then do graduate students. But if you can, this is the closest it gets to a gap year program. If you can delay your graduation, you don't have to worry about credits and push off paying your student loans back for a year, etc. All right. So, and as I mentioned, like that is what the majority of the people use their Boren for, is figuring out their own program and using it as a way as a means to pay for it. That said, we do have our flagship language initiatives, or our FLE programs. As I mentioned, it's AFLE, SAFLE, TERFLE, and CFLE. AFLE stands for African Flagship Language Initiative. That is, that's where you can study Swahili in Tanzania, French in Senegal. This is where French would be considered preferred. And then Zulu, Wolof, and Akantwi. You've also got SAFLE, which is the South Asian Flagship Language Initiative. That's in India. You can study Hindi or Urdu. TERFLE is Turkish. You study Turkish and Azerbaijan. And then CFLE incorporates or includes Indonesian, which we used to call IFLE, but now it's wrapped under CFLE. So you can study Indonesian and Indonesia, Thai and Thailand, and Vietnamese and Vietnam. And these are really, really great programs. They're very intensive language programs. They include a required summer program at either the University of Florida or the University of Wisconsin, and then an overseas program. For all of the programs, save four. For all the language, save four, the program overseas is part and parcel of that program. For Akantwi, Zulu, and Wolof, as well as Urdu in India, you do have to find your own fall program, but that summer program is still required. But these are incredible. These are incredible programs. They're vetted by Boren. They're overseen by Boren. They're available to all levels, with the exception of French. They're fully funded. They're credit bearing. They're very intensive, and the students who go on these FLEs they make incredible gains in their language. You get a U.S. transcript, you stay in a homestay, you sign a language pledge. It is not for everybody, because they only have a limited number of languages. But if you are interested in one of these languages and you really want to make, incredible gains, frankly, in your language, these are excellent programs for you to do. And in that case, you don't have to find your own program. This is the program that you're doing. And so if you apply to the Boren for the AFLE program, if you get accepted, you're automatically in the University of Florida, the overseas program, etc. And that point is just paperwork. All right. So we've talked a little bit about what Boren is looking for. Now I want to kind of segue into the selection criteria, because this is specifically what Boren's about. And this is what you're going to focus on when you're crafting a really strong application. And the first thing that Boren is about is national security. As I mentioned in that first sentence, these countries are deemed critical to U.S. national security, and that's a big, huge component of Boren. It's the entire first essay. So in the entire first essay, you have to explain the relevance of the country, language, and/or your field of study to U.S. national security. Two things I want to make sure that you guys take away from this. It does have to be U.S. national security. Sometimes we'll see people kind of focus on the national security of the country, but needs to be about why studying that language is key to U.S. national security. The other big takeaway is Boren has a very broad definition of national security, and it's up to the applicant to make a detailed, specific argument that's related to your academic interests and your professional goals. What I mean by that is that anything can be national security. And I really do mean that. I just finished my graduate degree, and I did it in international relations and political science. If I was to study Mandarin in Taiwan, anyone studying Mandarin in Taiwan, a very obvious national security argument, U.S. national security argument to study in Taiwan would be how Taiwan is a very close relation or close ally to the U.S. in a region that is dominated by China, which is a relatively hostile partner or like relationship to the U.S. And it's important to increase ties and blah blah blah. That is a very, very good national security argument for me as someone who studies international relations. It's also an obvious one, but again, as an international relations person, it would be a good essay for me to write. If you are an environmental studies major and you talk about international relations between Taiwan and China, even though it's a weaker argument because it doesn't pertain to you and what you studied and what you're interested in doing for work and for what you studied. A better or an equally as good national security argument and a better one for you would be something about how Taiwan as an island nation is doing a lot of things to shore up its coastal regions and, to prepare to take in climate change refugees, and it's sharing the knowledge that it's, building bridges with the U.S. to share the knowledge and blah, blah, something like that. That would be a much better argument for someone who is studying like climate change or refugees and what have you than the typical one that you would think of. So when I say anything can be related to U.S. national security, anything can be. I met one of our grantees a couple of years ago. She studied in Brazil, and her essay was about gender, like women's rights and gender equality in Brazil, and somehow she tied that to U.S. national security and received an award. I met this one grantee from several years ago who also did something about he was a history major and he was going to India and looked at no, I'm forgetting, of course, but it had to do with how it related to women in politics in India from historical levels or what have you. Anyways, point is, anything can be national security. And so the biggest takeaway is that you should think about what you've studied, and what you would like to do, and see how you can find your angle of national security, your angle for your argument for national security, and how it relates to something you're studying and something that you're passionate about, or something that you'd like to use in the future for your future career. So the next selection criteria is language and culture. Those are cornerstone of the of Boren in the logo. Again, because this is all about learning language, you want to select a program that maximizes your language acquisition. As part of the application, we ask you to upload a PDF that describes the program. But in the actual application, you have about 250 words to describe your study abroad program, summarize your study abroad plan. And then that's where you really want to highlight all the things that you're going to be focusing on that really allow you to delve deep and immerse yourself in the language. So if you're taking 3 courses in Mandarin but you have to take a business course in English, you don't want to spend time in that summary talking about your course in English. You want to spend time talking about your Chinese courses, your language partners, things like that. And again, this is the QR code that actually takes you straight to that page that lists all the different programs that we've had in the past. But yeah, you want to demonstrate commitment to the language study before, during, and after Boren. What commitment to the language looks like after Boren will vary depending on where you are in the language. If you are a true beginner, after a year, there'll probably be, even after a year abroad, there'll probably be some more language classes that you can take at USC. If you get up to the advanced level while you're abroad, then there may not be as many classes that you have available to take here at USC, but you could get involved in a Chinese community, if you're studying Mandarin. Again, or if you want to go back to grad school, you want to talk about that. Also, there's lots of different ways that you can do it. And it just depends on you and where you are in your language level and what your plans are. So lastly, and I want to be mindful of time so we can have plenty of time to ask questions. Lastly, the last selection criteria is public service. So service is that last cornerstone of the Boren Awards. And it's actually one of my favorite parts about the award. So in return, if you receive the Boren, in return, you agree and you commit to working for the U.S. federal government for at least a year after you graduate. So during the application, preference is for applicants to demonstrate longer-term commitment to government careers. What that means is when push comes to shove, when rubber meets the road, after you graduate, if you end up getting a job at the federal government and you only work for a year, that's all you're committing to is a year. Don't say that in your application. In your application, you want to talk about how not only are you going to fulfill this commitment, but you also want to then utilize that to, kickstart your career in the federal government or what have you, or before you go on to something else or what have you. So you really want to, the best way to craft your application when it comes to public service is to look at all the different places that Boren have served, which we do list in our website right here, where Borens have served, committed, fulfilled service. And then also, figure out what ideally what your long-term goal would be. The reason this is one of my favorite parts about the Boren is for a few reasons. One, after I graduated from college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. You guys have great career services offices. You should use them. I unfortunately did not. So I just didn't really know what I was doing. But because Boren has this commitment to working for the government, it's not a gotcha commitment. They want people who are interested in and can, enhance the makeup of the government. So they have all these services and resources in order for you to be able to find that job. So once you come back from your overseas program, you stop working with IAE and then you start working directly with the INSEP service team. And they'll look over your resume. If you give them enough time, they'll do job interview mock-ups, practice interviews, I think is what they're called. You get special access to INSEP Net, which is a special job board that has jobs that are oftentimes they're only open to Borens, or they're only open to people with these special hiring authorities, which Boren has. As a Boren, you also get these special hiring authorities for federal jobs. In a nutshell, what that means is you can skip a few steps in the qualification process. There's certain things that since I don't have these federal hiring authorities, I'm not eligible for certain jobs, but Boren alums are, even if they don't work in the government. It helps them get into the government, basically. We also, every year, we host a federal employment seminar. That's a 2-day conference where we fly everyone to DC in September after you return from your award. And it's just a way to kind of kick off that job search. It's 2 days. The first day is full of sessions where people talk about how to navigate security clearances. We have Boren alums who come and talk about how they fulfill their service and what they're doing now. So you can see different ways that, the different pathways that your career could take. And then the last day, it's basically a hiring seminar or a hiring fair. With this year, we had 28 different agencies from the government who all table, and you walk around, and it can be as basic as walking up to me and I say, "Hi, I'm Sarah. I work for FEMA. This is what my day-to-day life is like." All the way up to we have interview rooms, and they're supposed to bring people who are authorized to interview you and offer jobs. So every year, a handful of people walk out with offers in hand from this hiring fair. So it's a really great way to kind of get everyone excited and kickstart and find that job. And it's 2 days in DC with your cohort who've done really cool things that you want to talk about, because you're going to want to talk about your overseas experience. And after a while, people aren't going to want to talk to you about it, except for other Borens. So this is a great way to kind of increase your network that way. So for Boren, in order to fulfill service, Boren has 4 priority agencies. Those that there are tier 1 agencies. It's DoD, Homeland Security, state, and the intelligence community. So in your application, any job you get in these 4 agencies automatically counts towards service. And if you're a contractor for any of those agencies. So for me, I work for a nonprofit, but because we contract with the DoD, my job would count as service. So you don't, in the application, you want to talk about working for these jobs. That said, people have fulfilled service working all throughout the government. CDC is just like a handful of other agencies that people have worked for. One of the reasons we mention USAID is because a lot of people want to do Peace Corps after they graduate. And Peace Corps does count for fulfilling your service. Peace Corps doesn't fall within one of the priority agencies. So on your application, if you're interested in Peace Corps, my recommendation would be to talk about how you want to do Peace Corps, but then you want to, once you're finished with Peace Corps, you want to go and get a job with USAID, which is part of the Department of State, which is a tier 1 agency, and you want to utilize all the stuff you learned at Peace Corps to do it for your job, blah, blah, blah. That shows how you're going to fulfill the commitment, shows long-term interest to the government. It's interest in the government in tier 1. It checks all these boxes, basically. If you don't end up doing that, that's fine. But this is what you want to think about when you're thinking about your essays and your application. This is the timeline. It's open. Deadline for the fellowships is January 24th at 5 p.m. And for scholarships, it's the 31st at 5 p.m. And then the earliest you can leave is June 1st. Ahead of that, we have a required in-person convocation in DC where we fly you out to DC on May 30th to the 31st. The earliest you can leave for your overseas program this cycle is June 1st, and the latest you can leave is March 1st, 2025. These are some of the application elements. Skip over those. They're pretty standard. If you're ROTC or a veteran, you want to indicate that on the application because you can get, it does give like preferential weight in the selection process. And these are the deadlines, as I mentioned. So I just zoomed through that. So if you guys have questions, I can go back and talk a little bit more about how to craft a stronger application, but if you have specific questions about applications, I definitely want to hear them. So I can answer specifically what you'd like to hear, like the things that you're specifically curious about. And then I open this up to my USC colleagues as well.
Yeah, so just because you mentioned it right there, so if your program starts between March and June, are you then ineligible for Boren? Because I'm thinking of quite a few of our like East Asian and South American locations that may start in that range.
Right. So June 1st, 2024 is the earliest that Boren you can go on your Boren program. And we do have that mandatory in-person convocation in DC. It can cause an issue for like Japan and for certain, potentially for Argentina. They're still eligible. So if you were to go, if you were to go abroad in like say March or April, you would have to fly back to the US to go to that convocation. That said, Boren, as part of your round trip ticket, would pay for you to fly back to Japan. And then so you kind of lose that like the ticket portion of it. But it would start funding. But it would, you would just have to get to the US and then we could get you to DC as part of the travel for the convocation. And then funding will start June 1st throughout the end of your program or what have you. So you can do it. There's some hoops and like admin that you'd have to deal with. And it's not blow up admin that you would deal with, unfortunately, but it's definitely possible. And it is something that you are still eligible for it. But it would just be for the portion from June 1st on. So. Claire, on this question.
Yeah, I just had a question about the language. So I am minoring in French, but I want to focus on Wolof. Would it benefit me on the application to say, because I want to go to Senegal and I know French is spoken there too. Would it benefit you to say like, I also have proficiency in French and have been practicing Wolof, or do they really care? Is that?
Oh, they do care. They do care. So if you have, no, so when I say that there's no required proficiency, that means there's no required proficiency. If you already have proficiency in a language that's similar or the language, you definitely want to talk about it because that's only going to help you and deeply study the language and help you get around. Like it's so yeah, so you're the one who asked the first question. So yeah, so you want to you can be a true beginner at Wolof and that's fine. But yeah, you want to basically incorporate what you said in your question. And for those of you who can't see it, so she's interested in Wolof because she's encountered it in many of her Francophone classes. So that's what she would want to say in her essay when she talks about that shows her commitment to language study. Because like officially it says commitment to language study before, during, and after your award. And ostensibly it means the commitment to the language that you're studying, but it can also mean commitment to language study in general. So you've shown this commitment by studying French and you've learned about Wolof, but you haven't had the opportunity to take it. So you're wanting to use, for instance, the athlete program so you can really study Wolof, but you're going to use your French it's going to help you like further immerse yourself in the culture because you will be able to attack it, have a deeper conversation in French whilst you're still learning your Wolof, which you won't be able to have quite some deep conversations in when you're just learning.
Great, thank you.
That makes sense? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and like one of the things I always try to tell when I tell people who are interested in the Boren or filling out their application, so the strongest applications are the ones that you can really see like a through line through all of the key components that Boren's looking for. And the things that Boren are looking for are pretty much all in the language. Your language and also the selection criteria that I mentioned. So you want to tie what you've studied, your academic studies, and you want to tie, you want to focus on your national security argument, tie that ideally into your studies, but focus on the national security for the country and the language that you're choosing, and tie, and bring that back to how you want to fulfill the commitment and how you want to, use what you've studied to not just fulfill your commitment, but also, to have a career within the federal government. It's usually easier for me to use concrete things for this. So like, for this example, so again, like if you are studying cybersecurity and you're decided to study, Russia and Latvia, your argument could obviously be about Russian bot farms or what have you. And a lot of them are based. Actually, I don't think they're based in Latvia. I think they're based in Belarus, which we're not sending people to. But as an example, they're like they borrow internet connection from Latvia and they come from Latvia. I'm just making this up now. But so that's why I want to study Russian in Latvia, so I can not only learn the language of Russian, but also get to know the Latvian culture, and which will help me, which I got interested in through studying like my various courses to study in cybersecurity. And so then I'm going to go and take what I've learned, both academically and also how and what I learned for language and learning about the culture into the government to help combat Russian bot farms or what have you. That's a very simplistic example, but hopefully it illustrates how it ties together your academics, the language, the culture, all into how you want to fulfill both the commitment and what you'd like to do in the government. So
yeah. And like Sarah said earlier, like we have a team of advisors that are here to help you with this type of thing. So we're here to help you brainstorm, to think about how all of these different pieces connect for you. I was even talking to someone the other day about like how fine arts can be a part of national security. So we're happy to talk about these different things and to help support you through this process. So I will say, like in reference to the application deadlines that are on the screen right now, we do actually have a couple of additional USC support systems. So I'm going to actually take control away from you, Sarah, and share my screen real quick. Feel free to keep typing questions in the chat or unmuting yourself, but I just wanted to share that there are a couple of USC specific elements of support and also caveats. So you will have to maintain matriculation. We talked about that earlier. So you basically can't graduate prior to your program. You have to be enrolled some way, shape, or form at USC. So we'll make sure to give you the information on that. You do need to also apply through study abroad by their deadlines, and that is whether or not you are participating on a USC study abroad program. If you're doing a non-credit opportunity, there's a way to apply for that, but we do need to have you going through the USC study abroad folks so that you can have insurance and that they can make sure that you're on their radar so we know that you're heading abroad. If you are not selected for Boren, because you may have to submit your study abroad application in advance, they will refund the application fee for you.
That's great.
You will, one of the things that we offer as a service from the National Fellowships team is a campus review process that may sound a little intimidating, but actually it's probably the most, single most helpful thing that we do for you all. So what that is we have a committee of really awesome faculty who have different regional and area expertises, language expertises, and they have volunteered their time to look at your application and offer you feedback before you submit it to Boren. So if you are interested in participating in that process and getting that faculty feedback, I promise it's a pretty positive process. It's not intended to be intimidating. It's intended to be helpful to you and your submission. You will want to submit an intent to apply form through your candidate profile by December 1st, just giving us a heads up that you are planning to participate in that process. And then turn in a polished copy of your Boren application by January 8th to participate in that process. And if you go into our Teams channel, which I shared in the chat and will also share as a follow-up to this meeting, you'll find more detailed instructions as to how you do all of these things and how you get involved.
Yeah, and I can't echo Heidi enough. They have a really great, a lot of support here at USC, and the more people who can read your application, your essays, and give you feedback, the better. So
yes, yeah, and I mean the system works. We were, I think we were third for number of Boren scholarships that our students received last year. So we got some good momentum going. We have some good systems in place to help support you. So that was really exciting. It was us and the other USC, but we're the better one. So for those of you who are interested in getting started, these are the next steps. So submitting the intent to apply form, schedule an appointment with a National Fellowships advisor. Undergrads can schedule through Navigate, and then grad students can schedule using the link here or through the Make an Appointment page on our website. Go ahead and open your Boren application to see what it looks like, what it feels like, what kinds of information you need, and to get started on that. And then by January 8th at noon, you'll want to have that polished draft in the portal. Don't submit it, but you'll have it in the portal, and that's where we'll pull it from for campus review. And then you will want to submit it by the final deadline of January 24th for grads or 31st for undergrads. I think there's one more thing I was going to say. Oh, recommendation letters. It is advisable that you go ahead and, if you're serious about applying for Boren, go ahead and reach out to your recommenders before we go home for winter break, because everyone goes, things get kind of lost in the shuffle, and when everyone starts back in January, it's really busy. So we want to make sure that you have those recommendations available, because the committee will want to see those as well, just to get some context to your application. If you are able to, we do recommend that you get the maximum amount of recommendations. So if it says required 2, optional 3, do yourself a favor and get 3 recommendations if you can at all possible. Usually in fellowships world, recommended, you should really do whatever the recommended thing is. So we're happy to help you there. Awesome.
Yeah.
And I'll put our information up here, but that's what we have for you today. Yeah, Sarah, do you have something to add?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, so yes, for the scholarship, 2 letters of recognition are required, and there's an optional 3rd one that you can upload. You can also upload a language evaluation, that is optional. But depending on where you are in your language, it can only be beneficial. If you're a true beginner, you've never studied the language, then don't worry about it at all. But if you're at, anything else, you should get a language evaluation if you can. I will say that one language evaluation, one letter of recommendation does count as 2 letters of recommendation, but you can use the same person to write one of your letters of recommendation and to write your language evaluation. And if anyone has questions, we're a small team. You've got a great team here. You can also call us, email us with any kind of questions. And that goes for your recommenders as well. It's a fairly straightforward process to upload it. But if anyone has any questions or they get confused because technology never works when you want it to, just have them contact us and we can walk them through it or upload it on their behalf or what have you. So we don't want anyone to get discouraged by technological snafus.
Exactly. Yeah. And if you have any questions about any of these requirements, any of the elements that you're unsure about, like just ask us, because we would much rather like sit down and have a conversation with you. And you may find that something you thought was an obstacle isn't really an obstacle for you. So we really want to make sure that you're getting the best shot to do what you want to do and to really reach for your goals. So definitely make sure you're talking with us as you are preparing your application. We're here for you. We'll be here. I mean, I know I'll be here through December 21st. So I'll be here if you have questions once the semester wraps up and you want to chat or to brainstorm, just let us know. We're here for you. Any final questions before I let y'all go? All right. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you to those who are viewing this in the future. And hopefully we will see you soon for your Boren appointment. And thank you so much, Sarah, and to Michael, who is no longer with us because he exited the call. But thank you especially, Sarah, for all of your wisdom and sharing all of your insight with us.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. I loved visiting your campus last year, and so if you guys have questions, I ask them.